Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, April 7th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the 2026 generic congressional vote. The generic ballot is a point of metric that we have been using over the past 6 to 7 years on this channel, talking about what the next elections might look like based on current polling. And what we've been given is an immense opportunity to take a look at some early stages of the 2026 generic congressional vote before we start to see the real campaign season come underway. Now, we've been focusing a lot on special elections and the 2025 elections, which makes sense. This is what matters in the immediate moment and what matters for a lot that's going to determine how Donald Trump and the Republican Party navigate governing and the executive branch, or potentially, right, depending on what the public's response is to some of these decisions. But what is more substantive and what is actually more impactful are the midterm elections that determine House and Senate control. And given that the House is up entirely for re-election in 2026, the generic ballot today might be indicative of what we see in the results in just around a year and a half. The generic ballot also, too, presents a snapshot in time as to where the American public lands between affiliating with themselves with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and that's good for the Democrats at large. Looking at the fact that they lead currently today means that the majority, or the plurality, depending on what the polls say, right now it's the plurality, the plurality of the nation says that they would rather have Democrats in office next year than Republicans. The most recent one from the Wall Street Journal, too, also shows the Democrats lead by roughly 1 point. But there's a bit of a disconnect here. Democrats lead the generic ballot by 0.8, but Donald Trump's approval rating is down by 2, meaning that there are more Americans that disapprove of the job that Donald Trump is doing, but aren't entirely on board with voting for Democrats yet. But the good news for Democrats is that after the most recent House election results in 2024, the generic ballot being in their favor is something that they should look forward to. In 2024, the generic congressional vote said that Republicans would win by 0.3%. They ended up winning the generic ballot by 2.7%. Now, an overperformance here is something that I will say is good for the Republican Party in part, but there are certainly many instances where Democrats outperform what the generic ballot says, and in some cases, the actual results are better for Democrats than what the generic ballot reveals. In fact, 2022 is a great example of that, with the Republicans winning the generic ballot by 2.8%, but in the actual election, ended up performing better than in 2024. And so I think it's interesting at the baseline, though, in 2026, the Democrats are starting to build this up. In 2018, they had a much bigger advantage over the Republican Party, which is why it's a bit of a limbo state here for Democrats. They need to do more for messaging. They need to do more to win over the base of their voters and the voters at large, but it's a good sign that they're already in the positive. The other thing I would take a look at in 2024 is those races that were decided just strictly on the margins of less than 1 percentage point, where a difference in Republicans leading the generic ballot by 0.3 to Democrats now leading by 1 point, a 1.3% difference at baseline could make a substantive change in House composition next cycle. And that's because there are a lot of races that were really decided on the margins. Looking at Colorado's 8th district, a good example. Republicans won it by 0.73%. When you take a look at that and you're swinging that over to the Democratic Party, that puts them in a good position. Taking a look at a difference in a state like Pennsylvania, where Republicans won by roughly 1 percentage point, another race too, the Democrats again looking forward in the future, if we were to take a race and flip it over by 1.3%, that race would go to the Democrats and they would end up doing quite well. And just looking across the board, there are a number of races that were just decided by the low single digits as well. Democrats were very much within reach in states like Pennsylvania 8, Pennsylvania 10. Those are races that were decided by 1.3%, 1.6%. Another race here in Iowa in the 1st district decided by 0.19%. But at baseline, if Democrats were just to shift the results by 1.3%, which is the difference right now in the generic congressional vote from 2024 to 2026, what do we have? A Democratic majority in the House. But it isn't just that. The results here in the 2026 generic congressional vote do reveal something about what the majority of the nation would want, or the plurality of the nation would want at today's exact moment. But not everybody is going to vote. These are registered voters, people that are on the voter roll but may not turn out. Roughly 60 to 65% of registered voters actually turn out in elections on the presidential level, far less on the midterm level. Which means the Democrats are going to have to become more reliant if they are to win lower turnout elections on high propensity voters. The good news for Democrats, though, is that since the Dobbs decision, and arguably in this day and age of Donald Trump's presidency the second time around, they have become the kings of winning over voters that are low propensity. Take Florida and Wisconsin, for example. What type of voter is turning out in a Wisconsin spring Supreme Court race if not a voter that is high propensity? Somebody that votes in their mayoral election and their state legislative elections and in their primary elections and in the state Supreme Court elections that take place 6 months after a presidential election, 5 months after, right? Those are the voters that Democrats need to start doing better with, and they are doing better with. Florida is a good example. Special election in one of the most Republican districts in the entire state, arguably one of the more conservative districts in the entire nation. Democrats swung these races by massive amounts, 16 points in Florida's 6th district and 22 points in Florida's 1st district. The generic ballot here is an indicator, absolutely, that Democrats are winning back voters they didn't have in 24 or building up a base against the GOP. But it also says something, too, that in the elections where there isn't as much visibility and there isn't as much turnout and there isn't as much attention and conversation around it, the Democrats are still driving out their base in ways that if those Florida districts ended up being more swing districts, right? If these districts had been won by Republicans by 10 points in the last election, which is pretty substantive in a competitive race, no doubt in my mind, Democrats would have been able to win it this time around. And so it's interesting at the bare minimum to see those results in conjunction with a change in generic congressional vote. Now, one thing I also want to explore is, again, this idea of a shifting result from 2024. 2022, Democrats lost the House by more. The generic ballot was roughly even. 2018, Democrats won back House control after winning the generic congressional vote and being predicted that they would win the generic congressional vote. I mean, it is really something, 2018 to 2022 to 2024, just seeing how much we've seen majorities go from being pretty substantive for either political party. 2014, Republicans had 240 seats. 2018, Democrats had 235 seats. Now it's been largely consistent. 2022 was 222 was 222 to 213. So was 2020, just in a different direction. And now it's 220 to 215. So the House majorities are getting very small for either governing party, right? We've had 6 years, practically speaking, or we will have 6 years of House majorities decided by just a handful of votes. And by a handful of votes, I literally mean a handful of votes. If you were to take 5 votes in either direction over the past, 3 different Congresses, the opposition party would have won House control if we were just to flip some of those seats. So absolutely, these margins are going to matter. The shifts are going to matter. And that's why I want to bring us to this. This is map.jacksonjude.com. It's a website I use all the time. Very strong website. Highly recommend that you check it out. They have a new feature here that allows you to shift certain districts. And by certain districts, I mean all of them. You can make a decision as to shifting a district by 1 point, by 5 points, by 15 points, or whatever it might be. Now, this is something that I think is going to be very helpful moving forward, talking about a pretty universal shift depending on how Democrats perform, depending on how Republicans perform. But I want to just show you what a shift of 1 point or 2 points would do, right? A shift that would be very minimal compared to what previous midterm shifts have been. Democrats typically have swung the national popular vote from anywhere from 6 to 10 points on average in a midterm election where the Republican president is there. Not to mention Republicans did the same thing too in 2022. What happened then? Democrats won the national popular vote in 2020 with Biden at the top of the ticket by 4.5%. Republicans are winning it by 2.7%. That's an 8-point shift. So let's reduce it down to just 2. Let's underestimate Democrats for a moment and see exactly what it does to this map. There you have it. Democrats effectively win back House control. 2 points is all it took to take a few districts that were decided on the margins and give Democrats a House majority larger than what Republicans currently have. Let's shift it by another 2 points and see what happens to this map here. 229 to 206. Now, keep in mind, this is where we've gone from. Republicans winning the national popular vote by roughly 2.7%. So now Democrats winning the national popular vote, 4-point swing, 1.3%. Very similar to what the lead is right now on the generic ballot. If that holds up, Democrats win the House majority 229 to 206 rather. Even bigger than the House majority Democrats won in 2020 and bigger than the Republican majorities of 2022 and 2024. But getting us to a point of, what something could be similar to that of the 2018 results, you'll see that Democrats, just even shifting it by 2 more points, you'll find that the results here are quite significant. Democrats start to do better, and if we were to continue on further, would do even better. The shift map here benefits the Democratic Party tremendously because they kept many of the races in 2024 so close and competitive. Going down this most competitive districts column, you will see R+2, +4, +3, +7, +3, +0.1, 4, right? 1, 1.6, 1.3. And it doesn't get that much better in the more solid Republican column. 9, 11, 11, sure, but throw in some 5s and 4 and 6, 8, 5, 6, 4, 3. Those are all races winnable for the Democratic Party. And what we've seen now in Florida is that even more is, in theory, winnable by the Democratic Party. If we were to shift the results by 16 points, you can imagine what type of map that would end up with, right? You can imagine the majority the Democrats would be at. In fact, taking a look at Florida's 6th district, if we were to apply it to a House map in 2026, I'm not saying this is going to happen because it's extremely, extremely unlikely, but Democrats would be at 276 to 159. Unheard of numbers for a Democratic majority or even a Republican majority in the 21st century. Not even Obama in 2008 could bring Democrats to this point. So let's watch the generic ballot. Let's watch what these special elections predict and can foretell for regular elections. I by no means expect Democrats to swing the entire electorate the way they did in Florida, but I do think that what we're seeing right now with the generic congressional vote will likely be outperformed by Democrats. And in that overperformance, they will win back the House majority. But even in this case, where they only perform as well as the polls are predicting, which is a victory nationally of less than a point, and I honestly feel confident in saying Democrats will win the national popular vote by certainly more than a point. But even if it is, what was to the Republicans in 2024 to now, Democrats absolutely will win back the House majority even at their worst point. Because the majority is so slim for the Republican Party, and they have no room for error. But they are making a lot of errors on the congressional level, on the executive level, and voters are not going to reward that. And so taking a look at what we can expect in 2026, I have no doubt in my mind today that Democrats will win back the House majority. The question is, to what margin? To what extent do they win back House control? Well, only time can tell. The results here so far and the early indicators are quite good news for Democrats nationwide. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.